Good morning, students. I wanted to take a step backwards just a bit to reiterate some of the key issues in this course, developing and selecting business models, and then get more into a lecture about what business models are. What do we mean? What are they used for? Why are they important? So, I think it's first important as we get into that discussion to talk about the difference between a startup and a small business. A startup is really, this is the entrepreneurial endeavor that gets all the press and has Silicon Valley HBO shows made about it. This is a startup is a temporary organization that's really established to find a repeatable business model and scale it as quickly as possible. It's intended to be, the key word there is a temporary organization. It's never intended to stay at its current size or scope as it is now. A small business, on the other hand, can be a lifestyle business, a legacy business. It's the restaurant or the chain of restaurants in the local area that get passed down generation to generation. It's the small boutique shop that has been owned since for 3 or 4 generations. A very different model than a startup, which is designed to be temporary from the beginning. Another key difference: startups are engaged in a search process. And this goes for small businesses a little bit too as they get started, but it's a search process to determine really who the customers are and what solutions your business, the new business, can provide. Whereas companies, larger organizations, once they're beyond the temporary stage and they've had valuation events that have occurred to establish them, not only in the customer's eye and mind, but also with liquidity that they're able to then execute on business models. They're no longer in search of a business model, they're now executing on business models. So just as a startup aims to become a company, and an idea aims to become an innovation. And again, it's about finding that business model. An idea is, if you read my book, if you've picked it up, the first chapter is about ideas, the paradox of ideas. In our experience, and I say ours because they're my colleagues who have been working with small businesses and entrepreneurs and been small business owners and entrepreneurs and had countless students come through programs like this, ideas themselves are worth just about nothing because it's really about the execution. And in fact, if you're holding on so tightly to an idea that you no longer listen to mentors' feedback or even worse, customer feedback, that idea may be worth less than nothing. The paradox, though, is that if it comes into play that if you don't have enough passion about an idea, it's too easy to drop it. So you have to, you as a founder or the founder team, there has to be a certain level of commitment and passion for the idea, but then just as quickly move beyond the idea to the execution and finding a repeatable business model. Okay, so what are the stages of a startup company? Hopefully, if we're doing it the right way, and most of us don't. Most of us come to a new business with an idea of what we already want to do, which makes it a little trickier to pivot and do something that we may not be as comfortable with. But in a perfect world, we would identify a problem we're solving and then solve it. Build something the customers want and accelerate growth. So we find problem-solution fit. That's, do we have a problem that we can solve? Then we'd go to product market fit, which is, does our new solution fit what customers want? And then how do we scale? Customer discovery is the biggest and most important part of the entrepreneurial process. I have harped on this in multiple exercises and lectures so far, or discussions so far. We're going to cover this ground again because it's that important. So customer discovery is really this first set of problems here. Or the first set of equations here, do we have a problem worth solving, which means are there enough people that are affected by it, or does it bother those people enough? And then can we come up with a solution? In the business model canvas, if you started to pick up the Lean Canvas book by Maura, you'll recognize this framework here. We're going to talk about customer segments, early adopters, what the problems are, what the existing alternatives are. And this is an important thing too. Remember the pricing in the entrepreneurial finance model, we talk about, or I've talked about competition and how important it is to understand your competition, but not just competing companies, also the competing solution that the customer may have in his or her mind. The status quo is often, in an entrepreneurial endeavor, a lot harder to overcome than direct competitors. A process for doing this: we can identify our customer segments, list the characteristics of the early adopters. We're going to come back to this because, as I've said before, early adopters are key for a couple of reasons. Number one, they give you great feedback. These are folks who should be fans of your product. They give you great feedback if they're reluctant or if they have questions. Those need to be solved early because everyone else will have deeper questions or worse questions or harder questions. And also, we need to find those early adopters so that we can target our early marketing efforts and spend money on a smaller group of people. We list our customers' problems, and we talk about how those problems are solved today. That status quo question. And again, Maura's book goes through all of this. Here's a quote that bears a little more discussion. Steve Jobs famously said, it's not the customer's job to know what they want. He famously said that customers have no idea what solutions are out there. And this is, both. There's some truth to this. When you come from a design thinking mentality such as he did, to come up with something truly innovative, the danger of it is sometimes if you innovate ahead of schedule, timing. A lot of research has found that timing to the market is also a big factor of success. So if you're too far ahead of the customers, you have to be careful about that. So it's as with everything in entrepreneurship, there's a give and a take. I wanted to show both sides. That first, it's about identifying a problem and finding a solution that's still the right path. Sometimes, though, the customer doesn't know what that solution will be or could even look like. Here's what we mean by that. Let's explore this a little further. When you're buying a drill bit, customers don't want the drill bit. They want the hole, don't they? So what's the real problem there? The problem is not finding a 1/4-inch drill bit. The problem is finding a way to, is it even making a 1/4-inch hole? Do they really want the hole in their wall? Or do they just want to hang a picture? So this is sort of the process of innovation and how a new product comes to market. We found a problem hanging a picture, and we found another problem in the current status quo solution, a hole in the wall that no one wants. Is there a better way? Is there another way? 3M found the mounting tape that now is so common. And this is to follow along with Steve Jobs' quote before: rather than build a better product, build a better user of that product. Oftentimes that is what we're after. Don't build a better camera, build a better photographer. Make a better photographer. Make it easier to use. Sometimes innovations, great ideas can come around by removing superfluous features, addition by subtraction. Make it easier for customers to use. Okay, so once we think we found a solution to a customer problem, then we test the problem. What are the customer's needs? And there are a multi-layered sort of set of needs here. There are specific functional needs, right? Just like the mounting tape for the wall, we need to hang a picture. But if it was just about the functional need, the 1/4-inch drill bit, drilling a hole in the wall or putting a nail in the wall would be fine, wouldn't it? So there's something else along with that too. There's an emotional need to not, or a social need, right? Social needs, power, status, emotional needs, aesthetics, and this is probably where it comes in with the mounting tape. Uh, it's more than just the picture. It's not damaging the wall behind it. So that mounting tape not only filled a functional need, but also an emotional need. Are there bases? So the more needs you can fill in these categories, functional, social, emotional, basic needs, the better off your solution will be. Here's some questions to explore then as you set up your business. Who's our customer? What are their pain points? What job needs to be done? How is it getting done today? How do they already solve it? Same kind of question. What would trigger the customer to look for a better solution? So what would, if they're solving it today, what about your solution would make them adopt it? Are they willing to pay for that extra cost for your solution? And then have we targeted our customers tightly enough? And how do we find them? A lot of times, surveys are a little out of favor for entrepreneurs. Surveys are great for market research, and they're great for some of these more robust company behaviors. But for an entrepreneur, your job is to get feedback from key customers. Surveys are not a good instrument for that. The best thing that you can do is put your product or service in the hands of a key customer, an alpha customer, an early adopter. Really identify who they are, really try to make some guesses at what they will like, what they will not like, and then have the customer rank the problems that they have and that your solution has to get that rich level of feedback. So what triggers you in these interviews? What triggers you to look for a better solution? Is there a better solution? Why not do? What's the consequence of doing it the way you do? So these are the kinds of things we need to get to, really specific to our issue. Here's a great little heuristic, a great little chart you can put together. When you've identified a customer problem or a pain point, list it. And then we can rank it, right? You can rank a 1. I think they use a 1 to 5, low to high scale here. Does failing at this job lead to extreme problems? 1 low to high, 1 to 5. Is there tangible pain that you can feel? Are there unresolved problems? Are there many other people with that problem? How big is this problem? And then you can rank based on the customer. So say you give this to 10 folks, you can rank order these things, these customer problems based on the highest score about whether or not the customers see them as important, tangible, satisfied or not, and then how lucrative they potentially are. A good way to sort of classify your interview questions when you do it. Okay, so we know how to do an interview, but who do we interview? Let's talk about this target market again. We want to find promising market segments. We want to establish, they call it a beachhead market. Another way of talking about finding those early adopters. Then we're going to get into a conversation. I don't want to spend too much time with this entire graphic here, but we're going to get into a conversation about really setting up a customer persona, understanding who that alpha customer is in depth, not just, Caucasian male between 20 and 40. No, it needs to be more, it needs to be deeper than that, more thorough than that. When we look at the market, I've spent a little time with this in the entrepreneurial finance lecture already. There's 2 approaches. There's the top down and the bottom up. Again, as a reminder, the total addressable market, the TAM, the TAM, how many customers are possible in this industry, and what would be the revenue if all of them bought, right? So remember, I used the example, I think, of dog treats, and what's the annual sales of the dog treat market. That's your total available market. And then your job as an entrepreneur is to decide somehow what percentage of that total addressable market can you capture. Here's, as you're starting to get more and more refined, after you've got your total addressable market, you move down into your serviceable market. Maybe there's different channels that you can get to and can't get to for that total addressable market. Maybe some of the customers or your product is going to be too expensive for some of the customers in that total addressable market, so the served available market is a smaller subset. And then finally, your served obtainable market, the SOM that we talked about, is more who you can reach reasonably through your marketing efforts. Remember this funnel that we talked about before. If this is an example of a product made for mothers who it looks like, so we've got 300 million Americans. Then we narrow that down by who is sick or has a dependent who is sick, who's on the internet, who's a mother with 2 kids, who's college educated, who makes between 45,000 and 120. Whatever that is left with is 6.3 million mothers is your target market. That to me is still far too broad for most of you. However, if you are developing an internet-based solution, and we'll get into blitz scaling later, if you're a tech company, that's probably as narrow as you would ever want to go. So some of it depends on the kind of business you're running. But if you then have, if your funnel yields 6.3 million mothers, if you're doing internet consultation, telemed, some sort of consultation product via the internet at $7.99, your potential revenue stands to be $201 million a year. That's the sort of calculation that we're looking for. If you have a really rapidly scalable business model, probably technology-based. Many of you this will not apply to. Okay, market segmentation. We've talked about this. I don't need to spend a lot of time on it. We all understand this coming into this class. But who are the possible users? This is where, and most of you can do this intuitively, who are likely to be the early people, the markets that you would want to focus on with your business. You may be able to come up with 5 or 8. You may be able to come up with only 2. You may be able to come up with 10. The point will be we need to get down to 1. We need to get down to 1 that we initially target, the one that has the most potential to really adopt our product or service, and then we're going to create a persona for that target, or in this case, beachhead market. We want that target market to not be too big because we want to dominate it. When we step in to a real targeted market, we want to own that market. We want to be the de facto solution for that market. Much better to do that and grow from there than try to just be another solution for a bigger market. It also allows us this really important opportunity here to become cash flow positive in that market. If we can become cash flow positive in one targeted market, boy, then it gives us a lot of courage to step into other markets, assuming similar success. So how do we establish that target market? Again, we got to narrow down to that 1. So it's who has the most compelling need is probably the best way to start. Which one of the target markets that you've identified would be most likely to have the strongest need for your product or service? Then you can look and say, do they have enough money? They may have the greatest need, but they may not be able to afford your solution. That's an important consideration. Can you reach them by current sales channels? If you're a virtual business and that target market doesn't shop online, you probably need to find a different target market. Do they have a strong reason to buy? Can the competition block you? Is this a good first step segment? And then here we get to, are you really interested in pursuing this business? You're going to have a lot of check-in moments throughout the course of your entrepreneurial journey where you're going to ask yourself, do I really want to do this? It's hard work. Here's you will know when you've identified it. You never, shouldn't say, well, you will know. It's impossible to early on be 100% certain, but when you've targeted enough, and if these questions are all answered, they've got enough money, you can reach them through the sales channel, competition can't block you, they have a strong need, you'll know you're targeted enough if customers in that target market all buy similar products. They have a similar persona, which we'll get to next, and the value proposition is similar for all of them, and really importantly too, word of mouth exists between those target customers. Because again, your goal is to dominate this segment. And the best way, if you've read the book or started reading the book Contagious, the best way to really spread quickly and to really dominate a market is if word of mouth exists. That's still the most important. Word of mouth can exist digitally, but do these people talk to each other within this segment? If you can find that, you may be targeted enough. So let's build that customer persona. What I want you to do when you've identified your target market, tell me about what somebody would look like in that market. A real person, part of an additional group that we can all kind of group together. Prioritize a list of 3 considerations. Make it a visual representation as much as possible. Talk about those questions we asked before. There needs to be a rational need to solve the job, but there should be an emotional and a social component too to this person that represents this group that has this need that you can meet. What are their priorities? Here's a question: what watering holes do they go to? A super important question. Where can you join them? Are there Facebook groups? Are there Reddit forums? Do they go to the, if we're not in a virtual, do they go to the same churches? Do they go to the same outdoor farmers markets? Where is a way that you can connect with these folks? Here are some examples. We're going to go from worst to best. This is what tends to happen when we come up with a persona. We get a bunch of people from different areas of the business. This is a larger company, obviously, because they can afford these different job titles, and they come together, and we find Chuck, a 42-year-old winemaker who likes Lady Gaga. Well, that's fairly representative of a persona. However, how do you find the group that he's a part of? That identifies him maybe, but that doesn't represent a larger group and give us much to go on. A better way to do it, we can find, what's this guy's name? We don't have a name. We'll call him Vlad. 18 to 24 years old. I said Vlad because I saw Russia. University, educated, weekend traveler, management. We can find a lot of things about him. That's good. That's good. He's on social media, so we have ways, but it's still too broad. This doesn't get us to the need that he would have and how we can extrapolate that need beyond. So let's get to an even better one. Here's Vlad. We got 2 Vlads, apparently. Or this is Vlad 2.0. Now we're getting to something that we can say, here's a persona of somebody who represents a larger group, and we can identify potential needs. It's better, not quite there yet, but it's better. We've identified he's got plenty of extra spending money. He travels. We even have identified a need. He has needs new paintings for his apartment. So if we're a gallery, and this is an e-gallery example here, we've identified somebody who has the money to spend, who is a little bit urbane and sophisticated and wants to have a certain lifestyle and needs, probably doesn't know much about the art world and needs to find a way to buy nice paintings that take less time and make it, meet that again, that social and emotional need. So this is what we're after. We're after creating this persona that then we can say, okay, there's probably a lot of other folks like this out there. Okay, and again, just to sum up, the goal of customer discovery: can you identify your customer segment? Have you identified that problem that must be solved? How are customers currently solving it? And what would trigger them to find a better solution? That, in a nutshell, is what we're after with customer discovery. Okay, let's switch gears now and talk about the value proposition. This we understand as what is the unique value that your product or service provides. Probably the foundation of your 90-second pitch is this value proposition. Who is the customer? And here's a method to get there, but I think you can. So you typically do it through your customer discovery process, but it's a chicken and an egg conversation. A lot of times you can develop this before you get out and communicate with the target market, but it gets refined through the tests of the solution with the target market. here we're going to talk. I'm going to probably gloss over these next couple of slides because I think we've said it before. We want to rank in importance. Remember that needs can not only be pains, but they can be gains as well. So we're going to skip that part. Okay. Now we're going to get really into the value proposition. So, have we discovered a big problem? Are there customers of that persona that experience this problem? Do we have a unique solution to this problem? Is it better than alternatives, including the status quo? And are the customers getting the benefits? So these questions should all be answered in your value proposition, that unique value that you bring. We need to be able to say, we've got a big problem. Here's the solution to the problem. And why is it better and different than anything else? This is your 90-second pitch right here. At least 60 seconds of that pitch really need to answer these questions. At least 30 seconds. I'm not going to put a timetable on it. Everybody's a little different. But if you don't, in your 90 seconds, answer the value proposition to potential listeners, you've lost them. Okay, so now we have, thus far in this conversation, covered a lot of ground that we've covered before. We've targeted the market. We've identified alpha customers. We've talked about customer personas. We've talked about the value proposition and how to get information from customers so that we can hone in on that value proposition. Now let's talk about, once we've established that we've got a product that works, that there is a strong value proposition for, the next step is to identify the business model that's best to deploy that solution underneath. This is the business model canvas. You have the lean canvas by Maura. This one came before it, the business model canvas. I've had you use the lean canvas from Ash because it's more targeted towards new ideas and new entrepreneurs. The business model canvas is more useful for larger organizations where it's more of an entrepreneurial endeavor, where folks in a larger organization are trying to come up with a new product or reach a new market. As you can see, it's still a 9-dimension sheet, just like the lean canvas. But you'll see the differences here are things like key partners, customer relationships, key resources, presuming that the business has some of this already. So that was the parent, but we're going to now talk about the lean canvas, the child, the second generation of the business model canvas, the lean canvas that's targeted for small businesses and early stage entrepreneurs. Here it is. And I've gone ahead and put numbers on it. You can start really anywhere on the sheet, but there's two places where it makes the most sense because this is what we do initially. And this is how we spent the first, 20, 30 minutes of this conversation talking about the problem and the target segment. Before I go into how this is used and how to set it up, let me reiterate, and I'm sure you've read this already, the canvas is meant to be done quickly, in a team where you come up with different ideas and then bounce those ideas off of each other, and it's meant to be iterated throughout the life of the early stage business. You ought to be to do it the right way. You ought to be doing this canvas as a team, coming up with one or two canvases, or would it be canvae, that will work and then move you forward. When you get your product or service out on the market, you start receiving customer feedback. You reiterate, you do the canvas again. You should make this a habit as a founder team to revisit the lean canvas, and it's not more than a half an hour exercise. Revisit the lean canvas at multiple stages during the startup process. Heck, you could even say you could come back and do it in a staff meeting once a week for the first 6 months of the organization, and that would only give you more opportunity to have targeted conversations about the business and its potential. Again, dynamic and iterative. Keep coming back to it. Okay, so 2 ways to start. Number 1, we identify the problems that we're going to solve, the compelling problems. We identify the target markets, or the alpha customer, the early adopter. Both of those kind of get done first. Then we get to our solution and our value proposition and what it is about our solution that makes it so compelling to customers. Discuss the features of our solution. Discuss the paths we're going to take, the channels we're going to take to get to our customers. Discuss the revenue streams that we're going to have and the margins for each stream. We've talked about pricing in different channels before, very important. Concurrently, we want to talk about cost of goods, customer acquisition costs, and the cost structure around those. Importantly, then we want to get into activities that you can measure. We have to have metrics. We've talked about in a previous, the entrepreneurial finance model, the ratio between lifetime customer value and customer acquisition cost. That's a really important metric to track. You need to track metrics so that you know whether or not you're on the right track. As you're coming together once a week as a team and you're reviewing this canvas, you should also review the key metrics for your organization. And remember, those metrics as a startup company are going to be very different than for a large organization. If you're coming from a large organization, they're going to be really customer focused. They're going to be really heavily cash flow, liquidity focused, because these are the things that are going to push you forward. And the key area, the key aspect, probably the most important thing for an entrepreneur or for a small business is growth, because growth equals momentum, and momentum keeps people happy in a business. So these key activities that you measure should have to do with growth. And then finally, number 7, what is the unfair advantage that we have? What are the switching costs that we build in? What do we do that's difficult for competitors to copy? Or at least at this point, customers haven't thought of it, right? If we can protect it through IP as we're ready, that's even better. But what is our unfair advantage? If we haven't identified one, we need to keep looking. Okay, so I want to go to this. I'm going to skip that one to come to this part. So if we look at the business model canvas or the lean canvas, and we divide it up into 3 kind of sections. Is the business feasible? Is it desirable to customers? And then is it viable? These are kind of tests that we're going to do to see whether or not we have a good business model. And here to summarize it in terms of a less visual, more sort of Q&A approach. Do we have a product market fit? Do we have a problem? Do we have a product that fits the market and our customers willing to pay? Do we have solution feasibility? Can we build the solution they're looking for? Do we have traction? Does it scale? Can we scale it? Right? And then the next step we're going to talk about beyond building the canvas is talk about now business models. How do business models fit within the canvas? Let's go to that next. Here are some common patterns. So we've taken the time to develop the lean canvas. And now we want to talk about, and we've gotten to the revenue stream portion. Let's come back to, here we go. We've identified the problems in the target market. We've identified the value proposition. We have a solution. Now we can start thinking, when we get to channels, revenue streams, cost structures, we can start thinking about these business models. How does it get delivered? How do we entice customers? Here are some of them. And you can do a Google search and find dozens upon dozens of different business model patterns. Here are some of the most common, the most famous. And I'll put videos up for Uber and Amazon and some other companies' business models, how they've approached things. And it's about reversing assumptions sometimes. And we'll come back to that. But I'll give you some better options as we go. But for now, let's just discuss some of the more common ones. The bait and hook business model. Some examples here are you buy a razor. The razor doesn't cost you much, but then you have to refill it with blades, don't you? And those blades are a little expensive. The same thing with printers and toners. Sort of the bait and hook. We get you to buy it, but the toner that you have to buy later only fits there's the toner fits the it is it's proprietary for the printer. The blades are proprietary for the razor. So you're stuck in this ongoing pattern as a consumer of having to buy those more expensive follow-up items. There's a pay-as-you-go model, the second one. Pay-per-view is big this way, right? Or online journals go this way, sort of metered use. There are business models that are made on built to order, right? If you order an airplane, and frankly, a lot of cars and boats are this way too. You build the product that you want, and it's delivered for you. Dell Computer made this famous in the 80s and 90s. They were the first company to really do this. A long tail business model. This is an interesting one that the advent of the internet really created. Those goods that most companies have always gone by the idea that why would you want to compete in markets that are small? Go compete in a market where there are a lot of customers asking for these goods. Well, with the advent of the internet and the possibility to scale even in those sort of scarce volume items, it made sense, and eBay, Netflix, Amazon did this very well, to dominate the spaces of those scarce, because there's a lot of profit margin there. Multi-sided platform, Facebook and Google do this very well. They have ads on the one side, and then they have data, the value of data on the other. The freemium model, this one's very popular as well. Offer a free service up to a point, and then there's an additional cost for the more professional services or services beyond a certain time. Okay. If you are, I won't spend a lot of time with this because it's very focused on internet-based businesses, rapid scale, Silicon Valley type companies. If you are in an area where you have brand new technology and you're going to be competing against big competitors with a lot more money, and even protecting the IP, the big companies can bury you in legal costs and make the IP virtually worthless. If you are in a business model that it's important to get out there fast, and scaling for an entrepreneur is always something that you need to do quickly, but that's on steroids in the tech space. We have to prioritize speed over efficiency. Our goal is a network effect. This means we have to get out there. The most important thing is speed. We have to get out there as fast as possible, get as many customers using it as possible, so that our solution becomes sort of the zeitgeist, becomes in the mind of customers the solution for this problem. We can lose money, and you've seen, I'm sure, and it's driven the financial managers and the financial analysts nuts in this country for years now, ever since the advent of the internet. Valuation is not dependent at all on cash flow and profit margins in this high velocity internet market. The goal is to get a critical mass of users, that network effect, a critical mass of users recognizing yours is the solution. And then we work on operational efficiency and optimizing later and worry about profit later. Our goal is to capture as much customer demand as possible. So, best places to do that: software. The best way to do it: develop a platform that becomes the industry standard. A really good model for this is the free or the freemium. Like Dropbox came around, and they were the first to market and had 2 gigabytes of free storage before they started charging. Or to set up a marketplace like Airbnb, Alibaba. Subscriptions are a darling of the Silicon Valley venture capitalists and private equity folks, because that's guaranteed cash flow. So Salesforce, AWS, and then feeds. Obviously incredibly profitable as well. The idea being that it is much faster to scale or it's much easier to scale when there's not a variable cost associated with scaling. For subscriptions, for feeds, for marketplaces, for platforms, once we've built the server farm, there is no cost difference between the first user and the millionth user. Sure, at some point we'll have to add some additional bandwidth and some additional servers, but that is such a small cost for such a rapid scale. A couple other thoughts as we think about business models and innovation within business models. The Moore's law, technology seems to double. The effectiveness of technology seems to double every 2 years, and costs drop. So where you may have an advantage now, you will not in 2 years potentially. So it's important to constantly be innovating, constantly be automating where there are massive savings. Consider, and this is more for larger companies as you've gone, optimization. When we say optimization, we mean refining your business model to squeeze more profit out of it. The goal with, especially in this tech space, is adaptation. Where can we adapt our business model somewhere else so that it can grow quicker, so that we can capture more customers, so we can get more of a network effect, not try to maximize profit. And then it's also interesting that many of these, that this gets to a timing question. And again, I told you before that much research has talked about how timing may be arguably the biggest driver, or one of the biggest drivers for success for entrepreneurs. Some simply just get out there before their time and the customers are not ready. That's happened a lot. The contrarian principle dictates, or has talked about that. Google launched a search engine when everyone thought it was too late. And you guys may not remember, but boy, I do. I was an Alta Vista user, but there were several others, and Google came late to the game, but they scaled quickly. They weren't the best service on the market. They weren't the best search engine on the market either. But they scaled quickly. They captured as much of the market as they could. They lost money doing so, but when they did, they established that network effect and became the industry standard, and it just forced us all to switch. Facebook launched regardless of MySpace dominating. So some of it's timing, but it's also about scaling quickly. Okay, so back to the business model narrative. Or now to finish with the business model narrative. So when we've completed that lean canvas, we're answering these questions. What do we do? Who do we do it for? How are we different? How do we reach our customers? What do we charge? And how do we charge? How do we deliver it, the product or service? And how do we market it? How do our customers find out about it? Okay, then here's how folks who look at these business models, like myself, will assess it. We'll test its attractiveness. We're going to look at it a couple of different ways. Gurley's test is a big one. So we'll start with these. So this is on the, we're back in the business model canvas because I haven't developed this. I'm just trying to double check, have not. Okay. For the lean canvas, but similar sorts of things. We'll skip over the ones that don't apply, but customer segments. Do we have concentration in the area of the target market, right? Does word of mouth exist? Have you identified a target market that can be dominated? Have you built in switching costs? This is that unfair advantage, not relationships. This is that unfair advantage section of yours. Is it difficult for customers to change to a competitor? What do you provide that's different? In the channels where you're delivering the product, can you do it for a lower marketing spend than others? Have you established a good way to reach these customers that isn't involving taking Super Bowl ads, at millions of dollars for 30 seconds of an ad, right? Have you used guerrilla marketing, digital marketing strategies that have gotten you there? Does your value proposition provide you a competitive advantage? Can you create network effects? Do you have good margins? And do you have potential for revenue growth and some predictability around revenues? This is to that question of like subscriptions versus one-offs, right? A subscription is a really predictable revenue source that's going to be, if I'm an investor, a little more valuable to me than a one-off purchase. Here's another way to look at it. And this one I will probably use even more specifically as I look at your business models. Switching costs again. Remember, these are the costs it takes for cost that customers incur switching away from your product. For example, you're locked into a contract with your cable provider, and it makes it difficult and expensive to switch. That's a switching cost, right? So from 1 to 10, if you have a business model that does not protect your customers from leaving you, or that locks your customers in, obviously we're looking for something that can lock your customers in. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a financial pain for customers. It can also be a feature set or customer service that you provide that's above and beyond that will make it difficult for your customers to leave. Recurring revenues, 100% on the low end of sales are transactional, one time. 100% of the sales on the other end lead to recurring revenues. That can be the bait and switch model. That can be the subscription model. You get them in at a freemium model, get them at a low price, lock them in for additional revenues down the line. How do you earn versus spend your money? On the low end, you spend most of your money before you can earn anything. On the high end, you earn revenue before you really have to spend it. This is a business model where it's that built to order, for example, where customers will pay you a big, Tesla takes a deposit for each one of its cars before they make it, right? So they're earning money before they actually have to spend it. The built to order model, they earn, a lot of times buying an airplane, that deposit is a third the cost of the plane or something even heavier. Sometimes there's business models where it's a full 100% deposit before the good is delivered. Cost structure. If your marketing expense and your administrative costs are, your MG&A is 30% higher than competitors, it's not a good sign. If it's 30% lower, these are just sort of the boundaries that we've sort of put on this. It's really good. And quite frankly, as an entrepreneur or a small business, you ought to be running pretty lean, and you ought to be able to beat your competitors, especially if they're larger companies, on cost. Okay, this one gets number 5 to the scalability of your idea and your business model. If you do all the work, that's not as effective as being able to have folks do the work for you, right? Sometimes we can even get some of our customers to do the work in certain business models. So how much is your business model predicated on your time, your effort? If you're over here, think of therapists or attorneys who they can only receive in revenue what they bill out for the work that they've done, right? Versus those tech companies we've talked about, that the only difference in cost between the first customer and the 10 millionth customer is maybe a server that was purchased somewhere in between. Very low cost very much not at all dependent, on your own efforts. All right, scalability. How hard is it to scale? Very difficult. Virtually no limit. Protection from competition. Customer or competition rivals can look at you and jump right in, or you've got protection. This could be through IP. This could be through different feature sets or something that's difficult to copy, path dependencies, causal ambiguity, a lot of things that can make it difficult for competition to step in. Kind of done this. All right. And then the last thing I want to talk about in this conversation is the invest. So we've built a business model. We've identified our customers. We'll take a step back. We've identified the customers. We found the solution. We've dominated that target market. Our value proposition is fully tested. We've iterated our business model. Now we're ready to talk about investors. When do we approach venture capitalists, angel investors, and how do we do that? Okay. I told you before, this is one of the key metrics that they will look at. What is the lifetime value of the customer versus the cost to acquire a customer? The ratio LTV to CAC. We're looking for 3 times the value that a customer brings than it costs. So let me say that again. We're looking for 3 times the amount of lifetime value of a customer than it costs to bring them in. We'd also like to see the months that it takes to recover our customer acquisition cost being less than 12 months. These are good for capital efficiency. This means we're spending our money wisely. We're efficiently using our liquid resources to attract new customers. Remember, we talked about this before. If this ratio is 2 or 1 times or less, that means we are not getting the value for our customers that we are spending to get them. If it's 5 times, 6 times, 4 higher, that means we're probably missing some customers. We've probably got additional scale opportunities if we spend more to capture them. So we want to be efficient in how we use that capital. Here are sort of the moments I want you to think about in terms of raising money. Let's say that we start with friends and family money. We get going. We've identified our problem. We've built our solution, our MVP, or minimum viable product. We've started to test it. We've found some problem solution fit out there, or we're building towards it. This is where we do this bootstrapping, friends and family, this sort of startup seed round, right? This is the bootstrapping round. Once we've really found that problem and solution fit, we can now start talking about, okay, well, how do we then get this problem and solution into enough customers' hands to really be able to test it, really be able to try to begin to scale it. This is where, if possible, we go for an angel investor round, or we find a partner who has got some money, who's willing to invest for equity in the company. We give up maybe a little bit of equity here, not hopefully a lot, because valuation is very difficult at this point. So we don't want to give up too much, but we need enough funds to be able to manufacture in enough volume that we can get in front of all of our entire target market to really try to dominate it. Once we've dominated that target market, and we can say pretty definitively that this solution that we've got for this problem has traction, that we have dominated a market, and now we need money to go manufacture more, drive our costs down, get in front of other markets. Here's when we go for our Series A, our first round in the venture capital arena. And then our goal is to scale up. There's more to this as we build, but this is kind of the basics and when we want to think about trying to raise money and what kind of money. Here's another thing that we'll look at. Here's another way to look at the investment readiness of your business model. We do our canvas. We look at our competitive analysis. We validate that we've got a solution to a problem. We complete the low fidelity prototype, that minimum viable product. We validate that product with the target market. We come back. We look at the right side of the canvas, the revenue side of it. Then we develop a high fidelity prototype. We go back and then we develop those metrics that matter. So this is how we kind of iterate through the canvas to go based on customer feedback, validating what we do. Okay, and that basically is the business model lecture that I wanted to provide today. If you have any questions, I am certainly available to answer more. Dive into Ash Maura's Running Lean, Scaling Lean books. You've got one of them assigned to you. If you're in a larger company and want to do this on a more entrepreneurial scale, Alex Osterwilder has done the business model canvas. You've also seen work from Bill Ollett, Steve Blank, and others. So, good luck. Find that product market fit. Test those early assumptions, and let's start scaling.